What is up, everybody, and welcome to Real Talk, Real Tips. Today, we are here with David Banta and Taylor Tucker. This is a new series being started by the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation. So I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves.
I'm Taylor Tucker. I am the Blue River Fisheries Technician. I've been with the department since August, but I've got my bachelor's in Fisheries and Wildlife Science from Southeastern Oklahoma State University, and I'm currently working on my master's at the same college.
Awesome. David, how about yourself?
Name is David Banta. I go by Technician Banta as an employee with the Oklahoma Wildlife Department. I'm a wildlife technician, 27 years now, or nearly so. Work on the Hickory Creek and Love Valley wildlife management areas in south central Oklahoma. Have a wife of 20 years, 2 kids in high school, boy and a girl, so I kind of feel like I'm in the spin cycle of life's laundry, I guess you could say. There's always something going on, sports, FFA. We're very involved in our church, so I don't have a whole lot of extra time between all those activities, but when I do, I love to bank fish for catfish, and that's why we're here today.
Right, yeah. So the topic today is going to be cold catfishing. Here in Oklahoma, we're going through a pretty cold snap of weather at the moment. And David, today, as a department employee, is going to be our subject matter expert on catfishing. So, David, can you kind of tell us how you got into catfishing to begin with?
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be on the first episode of this podcast with both of you, so I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. I didn't have a whole lot of choice, I don't think, when it came to getting involved with fishing.
Well, we're glad to have you on today.
Well, I appreciate that. That's kind of you. My dad used to take me out. He was an avid fisherman for whatever was biting, and I still kind of am too, but he was especially fond of catching catfish from the bank.
Right.
And he would take me out before I could walk in a playpen, put me in a playpen, and when I was old enough to stand up but couldn't swim well, he'd tie me to a tree with a rope around my waist so I could get to the water.
Right.
And so, like, I didn't have a whole lot of choice, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I've loved it ever since.
Wow, that's like, I feel like that just perfectly describes like parenting back then.
Amen, and should today, in my
tie
opinion.
this kid to a rope.
The first life jacket.
Yeah,
Right.
Well, some things probably have evolved for the better, but I was thinking on the way up here about the baits we used to use as a kid, because I grew up in Hennessy, Oklahoma, which is a little bit south of Enid, in Kingfisher County. Not a whole lot of lakes in the area. I guess Canton's probably the closest one. So we fish creeks a lot. Turkey Creek, Skeleton Creek are local creeks there. And we used whatever bait we could find. We dug a lot of worms. And the thing I was thinking about this morning that some parents probably wouldn't smile at today was after a rain during warm weather, you know how frogs come out everywhere and hopping across the road. He set me and a couple of my brothers on the front of the vehicle and he eased down the country roads and have us hop off and catch the frogs and put them in a sack.
That's awesome.
Yeah, those are good times. I wouldn't recommend that necessarily to parents today, but we lived through it. Yeah.
Isn't it kind of crazy, like how versatile like a catfish eats?
Absolutely.
I mean, they'll eat anything from frogs, shad, worms,
crawdads. Some people use soap, wieners, dog food. I've heard it all.
Really?
I've never personally used soap, but have talked to people who claim you can catch
crazy.
catfish on soap. I think when they're really hungry and eating anything, you can catch them on almost anything that has any type of smell to it. Yeah.
Well, if you're listening and have ever used soap to catch catfish, please comment. Let us know kind of how that went and what you did, and we'd love to hear from it in the comment section.
Especially if it was lava. I'd be impressed with that. Yeah.
Right. So recently, David, I heard that you were into worm farming. Can you kind of give us a background on that and tell us how you got into that?
Absolutely. I was just moved to Marietta, Oklahoma with my job as a wildlife technician, living on the Hickory Creek wildlife management area.
Yes, sir.
Love to fish. Almost always use shad for bait, but a lot of times in running water, I prefer worms. And worms are always a great bait. Now, I had a man I go to church with named John Thompson, who's a worm farmer.
Yes, sir.
And he has a strain of worms he calls Georgia Brown. I'm not sure if that's their official scientific name or not, but that's what he calls them. Not super long worms, like you'd expect with a night crawler, but they're really wriggly and they're really stinky and they're really good fish worms, especially catfish. He gave me a start, which is about 20 worms.
Okay.
I got an old flat freezer that someone had put on the side of the road for the trash man to pick up. I beat him to it. It was an inoperable freezer. filled it up with spangled peat moss on the bottom of the chest type freezer, probably 12 inches deep, maybe 16. Moisten that spangled peat moss where it was wet to the touch, but you'd already wrung most of the standing water out of it. Drop the worms down in there, and then from there it's just a matter of feeding them. And I found out that chicken crumbles, which is basically chicken food that you can buy at any feed store for about $10 a bag for 50 pounds. Put it in there about once a week and keep them fed good anytime you need to go fishing, because a box of worms at the bait shop or Walmart is ridiculous these days. $4 or $5 for 12 worms. Get out of here with that. You can go get you 40 or 50 and not even hardly hurt your population. So,
that's crazy.
Yeah, it's been great.
That's awesome.
But how fast do you see them like multiply? They multiply pretty fast.
They do, and you can see the actual eggs in your spangled peat moss.
Neat.
Yeah.
And just a little like white.
They're kind of greenish on these type of worms, just a little dot, like a smaller than a BB even. And and then when they first come out, of course, you can barely see them like a thread, but they grow fast. Those chicken,
little tiny baby worms.
Absolutely, but they become adults quickly, and they reproduce like rabbits. So.
Nice.
Now, there's challenges with that. If you're outside, even if you're in an insulated freezer, if it gets too hot, they can die off. I've had that happen a couple times. 2011 was the worst heat and drought year we'd ever had. I lost them. 2 summers ago was about as bad. Lost them that summer. And I had one winter that was so cold that I lost them that winter. But I always keep a small igloo type cooler in my well house where there's a constant temperature. And I always have worms in that as a backup in case I lose my main population.
Gotcha. So those are kind of like your quote unquote starter worms. Basically.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And I've given some people some starts from them.
Awesome.
That's nice.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to get into a little bit more of the in-depth of our catfishing today.
You bet.
So you mostly fish from the bank. Would you
Almost
say?
exclusively.
Right.
I used to fish a little bit out of a pontoon boat with actually Tyler Wright. He's the hatchery manager at the Manning Fish Hatchery.
Right.
I fell out of his boat one time in the middle of winter with coveralls on, no less. Yeah. Had a good fish on, and I opened up the little deck there to help him land, and a big rogue wave hit the back of our pontoon boat. I did a header 180 into the water.
Wow.
And figured I had one chance because those coveralls, they soak up pretty quick and get heavy. So I reached up and grabbed the side of the pontoon boat, and he saw I'd grabbed it, and he kept fighting the fish. And I was like, go ahead, land him, Just take care of the important things first. But anyway, had a nice, memorable ride back to the boat ramp in my underwear after stripping all that stuff off, and it was about 35 degrees that day. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
The great memories. The fish was landed, though, 12-pounder, if I remember right.
There you go.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, I do not envy you on the boat ride back to the ramp.
Oh,
and
no.
Sub-temperatures in your underwear.
Yeah, I understand you were just on some pretty cold water with paddlefish recently.
I was,
yeah.
I went out with the fisheries team. We were doing some paddlefish surveying.
That's neat.
And we had a pretty big winter storm come in. I think the temperature was 26 degrees on the water. I don't know what the wind chill was, but it started snowing on us. And so I assume the wind chill was probably even colder than that.
I imagine.
But yeah, we caught a ton of paddlefish, and it goes to show how like versatile our lakes are and how extensive our fish populations are, that we can go out in the dead of winter and catch 30, 40-pound blue cats and flatheads.
But yeah, to answer your question, I greatly prefer bank fishing, and not because I fell out of a boat. I don't care about that. I just like the freedom bank fishing brings, because, I'm a long-legged guy, and I'm out there. I can go walking around, stretch my legs out, look for some arrowheads or, cut some bait up. You're free on the bank. And if you want to go somewhere else, of course, in a boat, you can jet to the next area, but you can also hop in your truck and drive to the next area.
Right.
And I don't have to put anything up when I'm done. And I don't have to bust out another 1,000 having a boat.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, nothing
Also
against
get
boat
a
fishing.
fire. You can
That's
enjoy a
right. You can
fire.
warm up
Big
with
plus.
a fire.
That
yeah.
is a
Have to be
huge
careful
plus.
with the embers, though, Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
So you told us a little story
Yes.
about how you had an ember come onto your line, and you end up losing a pretty big fish.
Unfortunately, and I was fishing with my dad at the time, and he'd already quite a bit older, probably in his 80s at that point.
Right.
And we camped out one night at Warrico Lake, built a nice fire, and, it wasn't like extremely cold, but it was in the late winter.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess the wind shifted during the night, and some of the embers, or at least one ember from the fire, landed, as luck would have it, in my line that was set out fishing.
That's crazy.
Got a fish on it, set back, and the line I use hardly ever fails. It's fantastic line, and we can talk more about that later. But anyway, it just snapped, and I was like, "What on earth?" Got to examining the line, and you could see where it had a melty spot in it. one of those embers from that fire to hit your line. So be careful if you're burning campfires or
Right,
your bank fishing lines. Yeah.
But I would also say, like, look for the enjoyment of burning that fire and just hanging out, have some
That's
company.
right.
Like, that's what fishing to me is all about.
You're
Going out
exactly
with some
right.
buddies, you know, having a fire, hanging out, having a good time.
Taking it in, you don't have to catch fish every time. That's
Right.
icing on the
Right.
cake. Yeah.
Right.
Especially with catfishing, I feel like that's one of the big enjoyments of it. You can sit there and really enjoy yourself while you're waiting on the
Right.
fish to bite.
It's
Agree
definitely
100%, Taylor.
more passive because you throw that bait out and you just get to hang out. And
It fits
chill.
me well. But
Right.
I've taken some guys out before, and girls too, that just are too antsy. I mean, it's just not their thing. It's just like, I'm not quite patient enough for it. You got to know thyself.
Yeah.
And I can hang out, and even if I go 2 hours without a bite, I've done it long enough that it could change at a moment's notice. And that's what you're sitting there waiting on. And when it comes, it's worth it.
That's awesome. Well, getting back into the kind of bank fishing topic,
Yes.
are there anything like for our constituents that are big into bank fishing that you look for specifically when you're going out to catch catfish? Could that be like weather conditions, maybe some structure in the water, points, anything like that?
All of that. Yeah,
Right.
there's so many different variables that go into the bank fishing for catfish. Now, you can go out and park anywhere you want and fish in any type of water you want,
Right.
but there are indicators that will help you catch more fish and bigger fish more consistently. First one of the most important ones, in my opinion, is wind.
Okay.
I always want some wind when I'm fishing. I have fished on days. Now, when you're in running water, the wind factor is off the table. It doesn't
Right.
matter. The fish are there. But if you're fishing lakes, points on lakes or flats on lakes, on calm, balmy days when it's beautiful, I call them bluebird days,
Yeah.
it's rare to catch a good mess of
Really?
fish. Now,
Yeah,
not to say you
heard
can't or won't, but
Right.
I want wind, and I like to fish points, even in the winter, especially if they're adjacent to some deeper water.
Okay.
Wintertime, I kind of move my whole scenario from shallow water fishing to deep water fishing because I think the shad hole up in deeper water.
Right.
That's what the blues are after, and blues are my main species.
Right.
Now, if I can find a point, especially with have a headwind coming into it, doesn't have to be voracious wind, 6, 8, 10, 12 miles an hour is perfect. And even a flanking headwind kind of coming at an angle across that point gets the fish stirred up. I think the bait are in
Really?
the area, and the fish will, if they're not there, they'll be there soon.
Right.
And, in the wintertime, blue cats, again, they're voracious eaters. They're kind of gregarious. They hang out in packs and nomadic, too. They're moving around all the time looking for bait. And so a lot of times if you sit on a point where you know that you've caught fish in the past in that type of weather condition and nothing's going on, a lot of guys, they'll reel them up and move, and that's all right, too. But
Right.
I'd recommend staying there, especially if you've caught fish in that type of condition at that type of year. Hang in there because they'll be coming across eventually.
For sure.
So love points, love wind.
So you're talking about going for where the shad are. You've mentioned before that using shad is like your favorite bait.
Yes.
In
I'm
the
glad
winter.
you brought that up.
So how do you go about like catching your shad?
Sometimes that's the hardest part of the trip.
Right.
Yeah, trying to catch shad. We talked a lot about worms, and worms are a great bait. There's lots of great baits out there, but
Right.
to me, nothing compares to fresh shad. And I say fresh shad because you can get shad from other sources. You can catch them and then freeze them up, which is fine. I've tried that myself. I actually saw a video where a guy swore that if you caught these shad fresh, had a cooler ready with icy water, salty, and then flash freeze them, take them home, pat them off dry, and then vacuum seal them, throw them in the freezer.
Words are hard, David.
Yeah,
It's okay.
woo, give me some drink of water up in here. Anyway, I tried that. Did everything just as he instructed, and I caught a couple of fish on that stuff, and it looked good when you thawed it out, but it just wouldn't hang with the fresh shad.
Really?
And the stuff you buy in Walmart, like prepackaged,
It's hard.
I'd rather drink turpentine and urinate in a brush fire. And I've done both. I will not use that stuff. Nothing against the makers of that. I'm sure people catch fish on it occasionally, but no. I use a cast net to catch fresh shad.
Okay.
And most of the time my fishing trips don't even start until I have some fresh shad.
Yeah.
Right.
And sometimes that takes half a day or more
Really?
to gather it up because, they're sneaky. They're hard to
Right.
find sometimes.
Okay. Any tips on where you're finding the shad from the bank?
But the deeper the water, the better in the wintertime scenario. And that's sometimes challenging when you're on the bank. You go out in a boat and usually get them pretty good. So
yeah.
that's where the
Right.
boat really comes in handy.
Yeah.
But
Gotcha.
I've found a few areas where I can usually get them in the wintertime. That's what I'll focus on. Springtime, it's easy. They're on the bank, they're spawning. Right. But anyone who's thinking about getting into bank fishing for catfish, I would highly recommend buying you a 4 or 5 foot cast net. There's hundreds of videos on the internet you can watch. And once you learn how to use it, you're set for life. And if you've been used to using minnows or, perch or crawdads, whatever, you catch fish on those bait. You do. Right. But in my experience, in my humble opinion, none of that hangs with fresh shad, particularly for blue cat.
Right. Yes. I think it's important to note that kind of more from the wildlife department side, if you are catching your own bait and using live bait, don't take that bait to different lakes.
Glad you brought that up. I was going to bring that up too. And there's also the mesh size deal, which most of the stuff you buy in Academy or Walmart or online is legal, 3/8 or less. Right. And, if you try to transfer your bait from one lake to another, you're breaking the laws. I understand it. And if you're living in the Oklahoma City metro, there are some lakes that don't allow cast netting. So I think Stanley Draper, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
Overholser, if I'm not mistaken. Taft, Lone Chimney. Check your regs, okay? Yes, don't count on my advice for that.
Yeah. Easy to read. Just check each water.
Thank you, Ted. That's exactly
you
right.
You can take 30 seconds out of your trip to check the regulations, make sure you're legal to avoid that big old fine by our awesome game wardens. I know that if they're giving you a ticket, you probably don't think they're awesome, but in our opinion, they're awesome for the wildlife and they're awesome for you guys because of the work they put in.
Amen.
So once you catch those shad, do you cut them in half? Like, how do you kind of prepare those for the fish?
It's a great question, Taylor, and it depends on the shad size.
Right.
Because, a lot of times you're catching those 2-3 inch shad, that's the most common. And I've hooked them a lot of different ways over the years. My main concern is I want to make sure they stay on the hook when I cast them out there because I like to cast a long way and really zing them. So on one that size, the first thing I do is cut off their tails, and that's to get some blood in the water. I want all the blood and oil in the water I can. Blood attracts sharks, and we're fishing for blue sharks.
Right.
So I want blood in the water. Now, I usually go through the eye with the point of the hook, and then down through the center of the body, and then back out the center of the bottom of the shad where I cut the tail off. Okay. And that will hold tight. Now
so you're kind of like curving
I'm threading them on, basically. Okay. Yeah, starting in through the eye and then curving it through the body. Gotcha. And on one that's a shad that's 4, 5, 6 inches long, the best bait on that particular shad is to cut the head off, hook it through both eyes, chunk it out there. It's got some of that gut sack still on it. They'll come to those. I promise you.
It's like a blue cat buffet.
I guarantee. And the big ones, like most people, I just cut them up for cut bait.
Right.
And, some guys probably know a lot more. In fact, I know there's guys that know a lot more about catfishing. But you need to really make sure that when you're using a hook, that it has a wide bend in it, in my opinion, for using shad for bait, particularly cut bait, because the more points you have, you're wanting to bury that steel up in that jaw, and you get a big old fat fillet of shad on there, and you can still feel the point. You're like, I'm good. No, you're not good, because you need to really have, I'd say, 1/4 to 1/2 inch of the hook, point of the hook exposed after your bait's on. Always use wide bend hooks. Yeah.
So you were talking about those smaller shad.
Yes, sir.
So just to confirm, so you like going through the eye and then down through kind of the lower jaw?
Through the eye, through the outside of the eye with the point of the hook, and just follow the curve of the body, like in the middle, in the inside of the shad.
Thread it on.
Yeah, you're threading it, and then bring that hook right back out in the center, so your shad doesn't kind of jut to the left or the right on your point. I want that point straight out. Now you can hook them through the eye and back out through the head, and if you're lobbing them out there, they'll hold. Yeah. But I want it to hang on there if I throw it as hard as I can, and if the water is warm enough for any turtles to be active, they've got to work to get it off.
Gotcha.
Because I hate when turtles ruin my day.
Right, right.
Now, other than shad, do you have any other bait that you like using?
Not as good as shad. Okay. No, but I do like right below that, and we have them down in Texoma, and that basin down there is called a moon eye or a golden eye. Yeah. They're a really good bait, an oily fish. The shad is a premium bait to me because it has a combination of oil, blood, and smell. And it's the main prey for blue cats. There's no doubt about it. And I want to throw out there what they're looking for.
Especially during the winter, because those blue cats, their metabolism slows down. They're not moving much. So they're kind of taking those buffets of shad when they can get them in deep water.
That's right. They'll get into a big group of shad and just have at it. And like I said, I kind of look at them like blue sharks. I want some blood. I want a blood trail in the water, and they'll come to shad. Now, you talked about other baits. I like to use, if I can't find shad, which is rare, but it does happen, I like cut carp, because sometimes you'll catch a rough fish in your cast net, especially cut drum. Drum's a really good bait for blue cat. And I've caught some really good fish on drum. And any rough fish you get that you can cut some fillets off of and has some fresh meat in the water is good.
Right.
But, you know, I've been fishing beside guys before that, you know, were using crawdads or cut perch even and doing really well. Now, I'm just saying, in my personal experience and humble opinion, that shad is the premium catfish bait, particularly for blue cat.
Makes sense.
David,
Yeah.
I have watched videos of you going out catfishing, and you're allowed to be a little cocky on this subject.
Well, I got to give the Lord all the credit, because, you know, catfish and any type of fish, as Darren knows, tend to get lockjaw when the cameras show up. So we've been really blessed to actually be able to have some fish to reel in when we go out and fish. But hey, there's a lot of guys that are better fish. I wouldn't even consider myself an expert. I've just done it a lot, and have stayed with it, and have been blessed with some really good fishing experiences. I'm glad to share whatever I do know.
Yeah. I think that's a good tip for kind of anybody listening, is like, catfishing and fishing in general is just like any other sport or anything like that. Like, the more you do it, the more you practice, the more you learn.
Trial and error. It's always trial and error. Yeah.
You just got to get out there, keep going until you kind of find what most fishermen would call the juice.
That's it. That's it.
So
it's addicting. It's addicting.
Right.
And plus, I eat a lot. And fried catfish is one of my favorite meals.
You are a pretty tall guy, David.
I think I've got a tapeworm, actually. Yeah. In fact, that's why I couldn't take ivermectin during COVID. I didn't want to kill that sucker. Yeah, it's kept me thin for years. But no, I love to eat them, so that's my main motivation. But, you know, seeing that rod bin never gets old, because you put in work.
Right.
You know, you're at the weather may not be perfect. You've worked hard to get shad. You've worked hard to make sure all your equipment was ready, oiled up, everything tight, all your knots right. When it bends over and you know it's a good bend,
right,
and you're thinking, okay, it's on.
Worth the fight.
Yeah, here we are. That's why I came.
That's awesome. So can you kind of explain like your go-to setup for us? Like, I know you like to use surf rods. I think you mentioned heavier weights. Can you just kind of explain that to us? Yes,
sir. Actually, I have two types of setups that I use. The main one is for just main lake fishing, and that consists of 11-foot surf rod. I like to use I think my reel of choice is a TR200G Shimano. And it's kind of a mid-range, because I'm kind of a frugal guy. You know, my dad was a Dust Bowl Great Depression era guy, so that was kind of ingrained in my head. But the drag works perfectly. They cast well, and they're dependable. And I like to use 30-pound Berkeley big game line. I don't think the color matters. I've used the fluorescent. I've used the dark. I've used the green. I've caught fish on all of them. But it's a reliable line. And that's the Berkeley big game trialing. If you're listening, I'll take a spool of that Berkeley. Kidding. And I've changed hooks over the years. I used to use a Eagle Claw wide bend, a laser sharp hook, a number 4 or 5, and I caught a lot of fish on those over the years, and they're excellent hooks. But I don't know whether their laser started misfiring or what, but the last couple of packs I got weren't as laser sharp as I needed them to be.
Yeah.
And, you know, it may have just been a fluke, nothing against Eagle Claw. We know they're a great brand.
Right.
But I've tried some other ones since then, and I found one that I've been using, I think, for 2 years now. Yeah. And now I can't even think of the name of the rascal. They're definitely not going to send me any, are they?
No
But
sponsorships on that
it's
one.
a number. It's a number 5. 4, 5, or 6 is usually my go-to size, because I want one small enough where I can still catch those eating size fish, but stout enough if I get a monster that I'm going to be able to hang with it.
I think that's the cool thing about catfish, though, is like you don't have to have a big fish for it to be a great fry. Like,
absolutely.
I know a lot of people that, like, with crappie, they're like, oh, this crappie, you know, he's size, but I don't want him because, you know, he's not quote unquote a slab.
Exactly.
But those catfish, you're like, man, this one's a little small, but I'm gonna fry him whole. So
Little
let's just.
ones
That's
eat
right.
good too.
That's right.
You know.
In fact, they probably eat better
They
than
really
the big
probably
ones.
do.
I mean, you can dress
Right.
up those big ones and soak them down and really clean them up where they're good eaters.
Yeah.
But yeah, those, give me really a 3-pounder to like a 12-pounder in that range all day long.
And I think you can kind of adjust your tackle based on what you're fishing for. I
Agreed.
mean, if you're someone that's
Agreed.
going out and you're like, I don't want to catch catfish below 10 pounds, like upsize your hook, upsize your bait. But if you're like David, you really love to eat catfish. So go with that kind of medium-sized hook to where you can catch those eater fish.
But and what kind of hook you use as far as the brand isn't important, as long as, in my opinion, it has a wide bend, super sharp. And the way to test that is when you get it out of the box, just get the point of it and rub it across the back of your thumbnail, and it needs to catch on there without any pressure. That's the sharpness it needs.
Good tip.
Yeah, as Taylor knows, catfish got a rough mouth.
They do.
Hard mouth.
Right.
Yeah.
They do.
You got to bury that hook up in there. And that's another thing I wanted to point out, because there's a lot of people, and I'd say most catfishermen these days have gone to the circle hooks. And those are great. They're fish catching suckers, because I know a lot of guys that use them.
Right.
I don't use them personally because it's just a preference of mine. Besides the bend of the rod, which I enjoy so well, secondarily to that, I like to set that hook. That's always been my experience, and I can't give that up. So I'm
I
not.
don't blame you. That's
Yeah,
part's
don't yell at me for not using circle hooks. I know everyone is big on them, and they're good hooks, but I'm going to keep setting them. So give me the wide bend, give me a good sharp stout hook, and we're good to go. The 4-ounce weight, like you mentioned, I like to use a bank sinker, egg sinker, it doesn't matter. Tie it on the very end of my line. I'll come up above that sinker probably 18 to 24 inches. I'll make a loop in my line. And by the way, this method I use, Darren, in fact, who's filming us today, he's here off camera.
Yeah, shout out to producer
Yeah,
Darren.
Darren. We
Round
call
of
him
applause.
Grizzly. He's the best. Anyway, I think it's called bank fishing for catfish. It's on the Outdoor Oklahoma YouTube channel. It was done several years ago. But at the beginning of that video, I walk through how to do that in case you're interested. But come up 18, 24 inches, make a loop in my line, probably 8 to 10 inches long, tie a blood knot or a surgeon's knot, and that creates a leader in your line. No swivels, no nothing. And that blood knot is a stout knot, and it doesn't weaken your line. You can ski behind the blood knot. It's a good one. I've never had it fail. And then I'll just loop through the eye of my hook, bring it back through like you're putting on a trot line hook or something. I'm good to go. I just keep it simple. I like that hook to be off the bottom, and when you have that leader or that loop in your line above your weight, when you're fishing, at an angle down after you cast out in 3, 6, 10 foot of water, whatever, your line's sitting at a 45, that's hanging down off the bottom, and any little wave action you have or anything is just kind of moving that thing.
Helps
I think
kinda
it
give
makes a big difference.
Some live action there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Little note for the people watching: please don't actually try to ski behind some fishing line. They make some great stuff nowadays, but we don't suggest or approve of that action.
Agreed. Thanks for the clarification.
Right.
But do tie a blood knot in your ski rope. It's a good one.
Yeah, there you go. So we've talked about rod, reel, hooks, and weights. Anything else that you're like, man, I think
people ask me all the time, why do you use the long rods? Because
Okay.
I'm casting distance. It's all about casting distance. I want to get out in water the other guys ain't in.
Right. So
And
trying to find those like deep water channels out in the middle.
Right. Or just, sometimes you have a lot of bank fishermen that have all the turtles just lined up and 20 feet out from the bank.
Right.
Well, I want to get out 60 yards
Past
away
the
from
turtles.
that where fish haven't been fished for. And hopefully there'll be a renegade out there ready to roll.
Right.
Now, go ahead,
sorry.
Taylor. No.
I was going to say, I know we're talking about cold water catfishing,
Yes, ma'am.
but do you use that same setup for your summer catfishing also?
You must be reading my mind. That's what I was getting ready to say. I
Nice.
appreciate
There
the
we go.
intro. Yeah. No, I have a different set of rods I use for that, especially in the running water scenario and the warm water scenario. I've got some 6-foot rods, and they're not expensive rods. I think they're Tiger spinning rods I got at Walmart years ago. Some Ambassador 5,000 reels, and most catfishermen are familiar with those. Those are Swedish-made, really good reels. And I'll also use a 30-pound Berkeley big game on those. But if the water's really swift, I'll just tie my hook on the bottom, have 10 or 12 inches of line, swivel, bead, and then the egg sinker, 4 or 5 ounce. And that's how most guys fish. And it's a good method in really swift water. But if it's just moderately moving water, I'm sticking with my loop. Because I've tried both. Like I'd fish all day with 2 of each. And pretty consistently over the years, the loop method would outfish the bottom method.
Right.
So.
We've been talking about running water compared to smooth, like still water.
Yes, sir.
So that running water is going to be more of like your spring, summer when we're getting a lot of rain, right?
Except in those rare winter occasions when you get a good rain like we did in November.
Right.
Here they come. I think it was mid-November we had a big rain down in my country. Took my son out for 3 evenings while the water was running in an area where it was kind of meshing into the lake, and it's kind of slow running water.
Kind of like a open river mouth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha.
As it was slowing down to get to the main lake, and we caught, I think, 25 fish between 3 and 15 pounds there. And didn't have a whole lot of time in the evening because after he was after school and athletics, and it gets dark early. But we'd run out there, and as soon as the water kind of ran itself down, the fish quit, and we packed the rods back up.
I think it's awesome that you're like taking the time even after school and his activities that y'all go out and
You
spend
have to.
that time together.
You have to. Yeah, it gets by fast.
Right.
It gets by fast. And we want to introduce that next generation to fishing.
For sure.
And everyone has their own favorite types of fishing. But for those listening out there today that maybe have kind of gotten away from bank fishing, used to do it, or are just avid bank fishermen,
Right.
think of someone, even if your kids are grown, I know you know someone that you go to church with or cousin, someone that a young person that maybe hasn't been introduced to that type of fishing that might just love it.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
And the bank is, to me, better than having them out on a boat because they can go jack around, dig a hole, throw sticks, throw rocks. What kids do when that first big blue gets flopped up on the bank, they're in. They're like, hey, what's going on here? So
That's awesome.
let's get these young kids fishing.
If you are one of those people watching, you're like, man, I really just don't know where to start. The Oklahoma Department of Wildlife website is a great resource. We have tips for pretty much every species of fish that we have here in the state, at least the game fish. And like even YouTube has a lot of great knot tying tips and stuff like that.
You bet.
So Dave, let's get into a little bit about yourself.
Yes, sir.
I know you brought this picture that I'm going to throw up of, wrong one, you and your dad. Let me get this switched real quick. So I want you to tell us a little bit about this photo if you can.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's myself. I'm on the left there in the red shirt. That was taken in 1975. That's my dad in the middle. My older brother, Greg, on the other side in the yellow shirt.
Yes, sir.
Now, when we were growing up, we weren't using 11-foot surf rods and Shimano reels and all this nonsense. We had, if we were lucky, we had an operable Zebco 202 or 404. You remember those? You probably don't, but that was back before 33s even. And we caught a lot of fish, but not a lot of big fish.
Right.
And, I had 3 brothers, no sisters, who all ate about as much as I did. So we had to keep the freezer full of fish. So we fished a lot. And he's the one who introduced me to that. But, back in those days, we would wake up the neighbors for a 4 or 5 pound catfish. I mean, that was amazing. And they would get up to look and enjoy it. But this fish here we caught, I believe, out of Wewoka Creek. My dad grew up, and my mom both, in Hughes County near Wetumpka, Oklahoma. And Wewoka Creek runs through that area there. It's a fantastic creek. The locals there will understand that.
That's awesome.
But that was the biggest fish by far in that time frame that we had caught on a rod and reel.
Can you kind of give us a quick explanation of who's in the photo?
Yeah. My dad is in the middle. His name's Marvin. He passed away in 2020 of COVID, actually. But he was an old school guy. He was born in 1925. Grew up poor in Hughes County, Oklahoma, farming cotton, lived through the Dust Bowl and Depression. Turned 18 right about wartime, so marched off to war, Battle of the Bulge veteran, and he just loved to fish, loved to fish. And like I said, we didn't have a whole lot of choice no matter we were going to fish.
That's
And
awesome.
all 4 of us still love to fish. All my brothers do,
Really?
so it's not like he wore us out on it.
Right.
No. And in that particular picture, you can see I'm looking in wonderment at this fish.
Is that you there on the right?
Yeah, I'm the one in the
yellow
red shirt. I'm the,
Red shirt.
yeah,
Okay.
red shirt. I'm the one on my left, the way I'm looking at the picture here.
Gotcha.
And like I said, that was in 1975. And to date, at that time, that was just size fish we didn't catch. And on the back of the picture, my dad had wrote the circumstances. That's the only way I remember them.
Oh, really?
But it's interesting. In fact, I've got the picture here on the back. It says here, caught out of Wewoka Creek, 5/25/75 on dead shad.
Wow.
And it's funny that we're talking about it. We didn't use shad back then.
Right.
I don't know where we got a dead shad unless we.
He took notes of how it was caught.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's my dad. He
He said,
took
"We're
notes
gonna
on
do this
everything.
again."
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But anyway, someone probably gave us a shad or one washed
Right.
up on the bank or something because we didn't know what a cast net was. Yeah.
Right. And then you said that fish weighed out at
12
what,
pounds.
12
12 pounds.
And then
yeah.
is that your brother there in the
Yeah, that's my oldest brother, Greg Banta.
That's awesome.
Yellow
That's
shirt.
awesome. So we'd love to kind of dedicate this first episode to your dad.
I appreciate that.
That's
yeah, he's
awesome.
a great guy. Great
You know,
guy. Yeah.
I know you've done a lot of videos for the people on YouTube and the Oklahoma Outdoor Channel, and I think we'll just kind of give this one to him and you.
Well, Jacob, that's kind of you. I appreciate it. I wouldn't be the fisherman I am today, or the man I am today, without him and my mom too. I don't want to leave her out. Wonderful lady. She's still living, so God bless
she's
her.
the one that cooked up those catfish for you most of the time.
Many messes.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's back before we filleted them, so she's having to, the grease splatter experience.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And they're delicious that way, but most women are like, I'll take the fillet. Thank you very much.
Right.
Yeah.
So can you kind of tell us either like your biggest catfish story or your most like interesting, or maybe even give us both?
Are you sure you want to sit through it?
Yeah, we got the time. We want to hear them.
I'm just, there's dozens. And again, when I think about all the great memories over the years, I have to thank God, because it just, he's blessed me a lot in this arena,
sure.
and I appreciate it. But I'll skim off the top, and a couple that are always the first to come to my mind. One is back in 1998. I was just on with the wildlife department, new hire.
Yes, sir.
In the Waurika wildlife management area. And we had fire breaks around most of the area along our boundary fence. And I was plowing these fire breaks for the first time. And I was way back in the middle of nowhere. And, you can see the lake from most of the areas we were working. And I just happened to look out the tractor window, and I saw this jug just skimming across the water. It looked like 20 miles an hour. I was like, holy smoke. What could that's got to be a good sign.
Yeah.
And so it was a long walk in there. There wasn't any access close. I say a long walk, it's a quarter mile.
Right.
When you're carrying 6 rods and 6 rod holders and bait. Yeah, it seems a lot longer. So at the time, actually, I didn't have that. I just started fishing, and all I knew was what my dad had taught me, just,
Right.
Zebcos and Walmart rods, which was fine. But I noticed that the guys in that general area that were serious about fishing had the long rods. And so I went to the pawn shop there in Lawton and found 2 that I guess a soldier had hogged. And I bought both of those for $20 a piece. And they were just no name, open face, but I put some good line on them. I caught me a big old shad, and I walked into that place I'd seen where that jug was moving across water. Cut me a piece of shad off, threw it out there, set in my rod holder, turned around to cut another piece off, and I heard that rod cracking. Turned around, it was laid over. It was buried. I was like, holy smoke. 'Cause I hadn't caught a lot of big fish.
Right.
Landed it, and anyway, make a long story short, I caught 10 fish that day, never got the second rod out.
Wow.
Never got it out.
Oh, man.
And they were all 10 to 25 pounds. Every one of them.
Wow.
Yeah, I finally ran out of bait and quit.
That's.
I was like, have I died and went to heaven? What is going on here? It's
Days
amazing.
like that are so rare.
Yeah,
Right.
and it was a rare day. It was a rare day.
That's
and then,
what I'd call the juice.
Yeah. Capital J, brother.
Right.
And then in 2015, every year after my dad worked in the oil field till he's 72, finally retired. And 2 weeks a year, I would take my vacation and we would fish all week long. Once in the late fall, once in the either late or early spring or late winter. And over the years, we did pretty good. But seeing the joy on his face of catching actual big fish and a lot of fish
Yeah.
compared to what he'd been used to for decades was just amazing.
Right.
And so he's always trying to get that next big fish. And, with him being that Depression, Dust Bowl era guy, we didn't throw many fish back. I mean, we never went over the limit, and it's nothing, nothing like that. But if it was blue, it was through,
Right.
I promise you that.
What,
We
threw
were-
him to the grease.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We're going to eat him, tail and all. But we were at Texoma. It was in early March, so it was still kind of a winter time scenario because the water was still cold. Shad were hard to come by. But there was a point where you could throw out into about 8-10 foot of water, and had a little bit of topography and structure, a little bit of rocks down there. Got just enough bait to set out the first line of hooks, set them out, put them in a rod holder. And this is 2015. He's 90 years old at this point.
wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
still fishing. I said, Dad, you be okay if I left you here? I'm gonna gotta go try to find some shad. There wasn't anywhere we was fishing there. He goes, yeah, I'll watch them. So I went and worked and worked and worked. Finally found enough to bait out again. Came back. He had caught, landed, and strung a 28-pound blue cat while I was
Oh
gone.
my gosh.
Yeah.
At 90 years old.
90
That's
years old.
impressive.
That is
There's
awesome.
nothing to him.
So
yeah.
impressive.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
He was really blessed. And I'm like, Dad, you got to be kidding me. So we baited back out, threw out, and this was after for those of you that don't know, in Oklahoma, you only keep one blue cat over 30 inches.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So that was his. Well, I hadn't had them out long, and one of the rods I just set out with that fresh bait just laid over. Like I said, it was just cracking. You knew it was a big fish. In fact, it was taking drag. And
Really?
it was hard to even get out of the holder. But Dad said, you get him. I've got my 30. So I eased back on him and fought and fought and fought. Of course, he was right there the whole time, just living this moment with me.
Right.
You know, landed it, and he was 65 pounds on the scale. And so that was, that was my biggest blue cat.
Huge.
What a great memory with your dad.
The story's not over.
Uh-oh.
We had just landed that fish, and I always, not always, but most of the time, take a little rod with me when I
Right.
have my big
Yeah.
rods. I'd like that feel, that have it like a bass rod with a Shimano Calcutta on it, 20-pound line. And if I lose one on that, so what? I want to feel it.
Right.
So anyway, we glanced over there. It's laid over. And Dad wasn't real efficient with that little Shimano bait cast. He goes, take that one. I said, all right, Dad. So I picked it up. Drag worked flawlessly on it, thankfully. Fought it for a long, long time. Landed it. 56-pound blue cat. This is all the same day within an hour.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and I said, Dad, we might as well just quit. I mean, we've reached the pinnacle. He goes,
Right.
no, we ain't quitting.
No, not after that.
So anyway, that was by far the best day. And I've got pictures and
Right.
memories live forever.
Was that here in the state?
It was Texoma Lake.
Wow.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
That's good for
Yeah,
that.
and we only kept 1 30-inch fish apiece, by the way.
Right,
I have
right.
always abided by that, and I want to encourage others to do that as well.
Right, because those are breeder fish.
Yes, sir.
And when you have those big fish like that, it's important that we give those good genetics back to the lake so that they can keep reproducing and keep, spawning.
You said it,
and
Jacob. You said it.
Keep giving us those big fish.
Amen. Our grandchildren want to catch them too.
Right, right. So we're kind of coming to the end of our podcast today. What would kind of be your suggestions for someone that's like just starting out?
A new fisherman, I would say, don't go overboard right off the bat. You don't have to
Right.
have the greatest gear. Like I said, I found my first 2 rigs in a pawn shop.
Right.
Look around. You don't have to have 11-foot rods either. Get you something 6 or 7 foot, a reliable reel, but get good line. Make sure you have good terminal tackle as far as your hook. And the stuff we've already talked about today, get a cast net. A 4-footer's fine. You can get them at Academy or Walmart. They're not horrible as far as pricing. Learn how to throw it before you go out.
Yeah.
Like I say, there's
Practice,
tons of
practice,
videos,
practice.
tons. Yeah, and then if you don't want to go that route and just want to use worms, frog, shad, crawdads, perch, I did that for decades. I love it.
Right.
Go do it. But if you want to take the next step, then get you a net and learn how to catch those shad.
For sure.
You'll see the difference.
Yeah, and don't get frustrated with it. They can be a little frustrating learning the cast
Absolutely.
net, but just a little practice and it gets a lot easier.
Right.
Taylor, you're right.
I think it's important for people to know that cast nets are like kind of a higher level fishing skill.
Agreed. Agreed. And they're not an absolute must.
Right.
But for a beginner, another very important thing is, and Taylor kind of alluded to it a little bit, don't get frustrated if you don't catch fish right off the bat. You got to pay your dues.
Right.
You've got to pay your dues.
Right.
And sometimes they seem a little bit expensive. You may be out there, and like I say, I don't catch fish every time I go out. I'm just going to be straight up. And guys that do are just better fishermen than I am.
Right.
We'll leave it at that. But if you want to go out and spend a couple of days in an area you haven't done any good, move. Try to find a different point, maybe something with a little bit of structure.
For sure.
But if you stay after it and the dues get paid, you're going to hit them right on the head one of these days. They're going to be there, and you're going to have fish flopping up on the bank. And it's
Right.
going to be worth every minute you invested in
Well,
that.
nowadays, like they make plenty of apps and websites that'll actually give you the underwater topography
It's amazing.
Yeah,
of
that's-
the lake you're fishing.
Yes.
So I think it's important for people to know that as well. Kind of look for those like just small helpful tips of like, okay, I'm out on this point. This website shows that there's a 20-foot hole out in this direction. Like aim for the edge of that hole. Try to get your bait out there.
Yes.
Use your resources. Use our website.
Agreed. The technology is amazing. We have no
Right.
excuses anymore. And one other thing I would add on the tail end of that, don't be afraid to move a short distance. I can't tell you how many times over the years where I've moved 50 foot down the bank, had been skunked for hours, and started catching fish. Sometimes a little move goes a long way.
Well, like we mentioned earlier, like in the wintertime, the water cools down, their metabolism slows.
Yes.
It's important to know that the fish aren't going to go far from the bait. I mean, or go far to find bait.
I would agree with that, and add that blue cat, it's all they know is to eat. They are voracious eaters, especially in any time pre-spawn.
Right.
We had a shad kill on Warwica Lake several years ago when it iced over for 2 or 3 weeks, and especially threadfin. You know, they're kind of finicky when it comes to cold water, as you know, Taylor. But I went down there to fish after the water thawed, and they were so hard to catch. And I finally caught a pretty decent one, like 9 pounds. He had dead shad coming out of his throat, and he was still eating.
Wow.
He was still eating.
Right.
They're like a bass. Have you ever caught a bass that had like frog legs sticking out of his throat?
Right.
They see something like, that's it. So if they smell shad and see shad, you'll catch them.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So we've got kind of the tips for the beginners. One
Yes.
thing I do want to point out that you mentioned earlier is running a bead above your swivel, in between your swivel and your weight.
Absolutely.
Can you kind of explain to the viewers why you do that?
Yeah, I should have done it earlier. When you have that weight constantly coming up and down that line and hit the top of that swivel, you're going to fray your line.
Right.
And that bead it's a boundary between the end of your weight. And most people will use like an egg weight, you know, that's got a hole all the way through the center, and it'll slide down, hit that bead, a soft bead, instead of hitting that metal on that
Right.
swivel, and it'll keep your line from fraying. Absolutely. It'll save you losing a big fish.
For sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, using that
absolutely.
swivel to allow the weight to stay on the bottom, but bringing that bait up just a little bit in the water column to kind of give it right in front of that fish's face.
Yep. To me, that's made all the difference. And listen, everyone does it differently. It's like filleting a fish. Everyone does it differently.
Right.
If it gets the job done, that's the right way. When you're throwing a
100%.
net, if it gets open, you threw it the right way. I don't care what. You can put it in your mouth or whatever. If it gets open, you're doing it right. And it's the same way with fishing. This is the method that I've kind of developed over the decades that has allowed me to catch a lot of fish, and I'm going to stick with it. Some guys would rather have their bait on the bottom in all conditions, and guess what? They catch fish.
Right.
Fish can be caught. These are just little things that you can kind of tweak a little bit, maybe
For
to
sure.
improve your performance, but may not work for everyone. It has worked for me,
Definitely.
though. On the fraying line, one thing about people who are already fishermen, most will probably do this, but it's easy to forget. And if you do forget for too long, you'll be reminded in a way that you won't forget. But check your line before you throw it out, all the way from the reel up through your eyes, all the way down to your terminal tackle between your fingers. If there's any type of nick or fray, anything you can feel, chunk it. Put your cut below that between your reel and the fray or the nick. Bring it back through, tie your stuff back on. You don't want to lose a fish of a lifetime if it comes along because
For
you didn't
sure.
spend 5 minutes to check.
Right.
Yeah, because they get boogered up, you know.
Right.
I just throw mine in the back of the truck. I don't even break them down.
Right.
Yeah, and so I have to check mine.
For sure.
Yeah, because I'm sure my tailgate has a few nicks on it that'll cut line. Yeah.
Yeah, no, going on to that, as conservationists and people who care for the environment and our local species, please take your trash with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
it's one of those things you're talking about, okay, like, you know, you've got to cut off just a short piece of line. Like, it's so simple to just take that line, toss it on the ground, and keep moving. But if X amount of people do that, you're
Yes.
eventually going to get a buildup of trash. And, you know, maybe you're like, oh, my chair broke. And as David said earlier, like, oh, I'll just leave it for the next guy. Please don't leave it for the next
Give
guy.
me a break. Taylor knows about this.
Yes, I
Taylor works at
do.
Blue River. We're kindred spirits. Let them have it.
That's why if you can pack it in, you can back it out.
Yeah.
At Blue River, people will take bags, and we do have a lot of really great constituents that will go and pick up other trash that
sure.
other people have left. And do that. If you have the opportunity to pick up something, even if you didn't leave it, leave the place better than you found it.
Right.
Like, you want your children to be able to enjoy this in later years, too.
So well said. So well said. And it's a generational problem. As long as kids see their grandpappy or their Uncle Joe throwing trash out, guess what? They're going to do it too.
Yeah.
And we talked about it earlier. What is it with these styrofoam worm containers? Are they impossible to put in a bag?
Yeah,
They're everywhere. For
Right.
Pete's sake, load that stuff up. We don't want it.
right. Well, I think, as we mentioned earlier, like, I personally fish a lot of neighborhood ponds here around Oklahoma City.
Okay.
Like, I'll talk to a homeowner or somebody like that and get permission to go
I
fish.
love that.
Yeah.
Love that. Yeah.
it tends that I'll fish a spot and then come back a couple weeks later, go to fish again, and that homeowner's like, yeah, we had an issue with someone coming out, leaving trash or something like that. And it kind of ruins the opportunity for other fishermen who do take care of the opportunities that people give them.
Don't give us a black eye.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a local pond in my area, and there's the family that owns it really loves seeing little kids get out there and fish. But in the last couple years, they've been finding so much trash around the pond and just people being really disrespectful to the fences and gates.
Right.
They've had to completely close it up to the public. So
Before we close, I did come to my mind the company that makes that hook I use. It's Mustad. It's Mustad. I wasn't going to let that fall without throwing that out there. It's a Mustad ultra point, long shank, big gun bait hook. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it. It's a lot of words, but it's a good hook.
Well, we can't.
I remembered it.
We can't tell you to buy that.
No. And I'm not. I haven't been in
David's
cahoots with them
opinion,
at all. That's my favorite hook personally.
But like I said, just don't be the person that ruins the opportunity for a young kid
Thank
to
you
go
for
out
bringing that
and
up,
enjoy
Jacob.
the outdoors.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this will bring us to the end of today's episode of Real Talk, Real Tips on the Oklahoma Outdoor Channel. This episode is brought to you by the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation. We want to give a big thanks to David for joining us today.
My pleasure. You guys were great.
you.
No, you guys were great.
This was awesome,
Appreciate it.
man.
Yes.
I hope you all enjoyed this discussion on cold catfishing, and don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms, and don't miss the next episode on crappie fishing. So just remember, get out there, enjoy it. Kind of take it slow. Don't let life speed by you. And fishing's a great way to do that. It's a great way to take it slow and easy. So we'll see y'all next time.
Hook them up.